Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Picard Season 3, Episode 10, The Last Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Picard Season 3, Episode 10, so I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for the finale of Season 3 of Picard if you have not seen it, or the series finale of Picard, I should say. Hopefully. We'll see. I'm pretty sure that's the case. Even if they continue the story, it will probably be a spin-off. Rather, I think Picard is at an end, as they say. But, anyway, if you haven't seen this, you will not want to watch this video. Otherwise, some things will be spoiled for you. So, what did I feel about this episode? Well, yeah, it's hard to say because there's a lot of conflicting feelings that I have, but I'm going to be doing a review for this season as a whole next week, so I'm trying not to talk about the season as a whole, but it's hard not to because a lot of my feelings for this episode is pretty much similar or almost exactly the same as my feelings for the season as a whole, and is really tied into it. And that is to say, I think my feelings could be summed up as thus. I liked the character moments in this season and in this episode, but I hated the plot elements. And I think that's probably, actually, as I'm thinking about it, I think that's more true of this episode than the season as a whole. Because there were some plot elements in the season, such as the changelings and Vadic and the conspiracy and Ro. Some of those plot elements, and then, Vadic trying to get Jack. Some of the plot elements I think really worked, but then others I hated. Whereas this episode is more of, I hated all the plot elements, but I liked the character stuff. And it's funny because as I was watching this episode, I kept in my mind comparing it because it kept reminding me of other Star Trek episodes and shows that it was very similar to other Star Trek episodes or shows, and every time I compared it, my automatic reaction is the other show did it better. The other episode did it better. And that's what I kept thinking of. Now, one thing I do want to address is after last week's episode, because I recorded my review before I really saw many of the reactions. So over the past week, I've been watching more videos and more reactions to last week's episode. And I ignore the people who were 100% positive. We're just not on the same page. But the overwhelming, doubts I had heard from people were people saying that, oh, it's the Borg. I don't like the Borg, but everything else is fine. I just wish they didn't do the Borg. Which I actually disagree. That's not my reaction. My reaction to seeing the Borg is, oh, I wish it wasn't the Borg, but as long as they do something good with it, I'll be fine with it. And they didn't do something good with it. They did something terrible with it. So I think my problem isn't that simply, I think, so a lot of people will simply state their problem is it's the Borg. That's not my problem. My problem is the convoluted, dumb, nonsensical plot that pivots, in the last two episodes, the season's something totally different. And in the last two episodes, they change it to something completely, utterly different. Not just changing the villain from the Changelings to the Borg. The difference is much huge. It becomes an entirely different show. Now, I do know, and I know a lot of people are going to point this out, so I'll preempt that. I do know that this was being set up for. If you go back and watch the season, you can see all the seeds and all the plants being laid, but they're just setting up for the two episodes to be completely different than the rest of the season, as far as plot goes anyway. And I still think that sucks. And I'm still, I don't care how much they set up for. I don't care how many Easter eggs. Look, see, there's things that show when Jack was watching people transport there, he saw vines all over them. So it's setting up for that means that's the virus, the Borg virus. They showed this earlier in the season. I don't care. Doesn't change the fact that this two episodes is something entirely different. They just pivot to a convoluted, nonsensical, dumb plot. Now, let me clarify one thing, because I said I don't care if they do the Borg. And, I mean, I do care. I wish they wouldn't. But if they did something good with them, I would be okay. Like, if they had an amazing plot with the Borg, I'd be like, okay, fine, you justify it. But let me clarify something. I say that for the Borg, not the Borg Queen. My feelings on the Borg Queen is completely different than my feelings on the Borg. Now, if you show me the Borg, fine. You show me the Borg Queen, not fine. I think it's impossible to do anything good or awesome with the Borg Queen because this character sucks. This character is ridiculous. The character was never good in the first place. First Contact, it was just this stupid excuse to have a singular person be the villain, which I wish they never did. I still think First Contact is decent. I think it's way better than this two-part finale, to be clear. Yeah, so I wish they hadn't done the Borg Queen in First Contact, but they did, and it was decent, but we never should have gotten her again. Each subsequent revisiting of the Borg Queen has been absolutely terrible. She ruined Voyager. Voyager was actually doing good with the Borg until they introduced the Borg Queen. That's when it all went completely downhill, and they completely ruined the show. I'm not even going to get into season 2 of Picard. That's especially since this season's acting like it didn't exist. I won't even get into it. And so seeing the Borg, the scenes with the Borg Queen in this episode were just painful to watch. I just can't stand this character. I think she's... I'm going to say, people who watch my channel, are familiar with my channel, will know what a big deal this statement I'm about to say is. And I don't think I felt this way until I saw this episode just now. I think this episode really ratifies and changed that for me. Alright, so here is my really bold statement. If you're unfamiliar with my channel, it's not going to seem like a big deal. But those who know my opinion on things, this is going to really shock you. The Borg Queen is worse than Vic Fontaine. That's what I decided. Like, if I go back and do 10 worst characters in Star Trek, Vic Fontaine would be knocked down to number 2. New champion, Borg Queen. She is now my number 1 worst, most hated character in the entire Star Trek franchise. Because, just stop doing her! For fuck's sake! Just stop it! Okay, so... So, alright, since I'm talking about the Borg, in this episode, the Borg Queen mentions, like, you wiped us out or something, and that we've been wiped out by this virus that you implanted. And I was like, what the fuck is she talking about? So I thought they were I was trying to put my mind back to season 1 or 2 of Picard to see if she's referencing something there, but no, that wasn't. And then I tried to think, well, maybe they're referring to something that happened off screen. But then I heard some other people on YouTube mention Endgame. I'm like, so this brings me back to Endgame Voyager, where when I did this whole hour-and-a-half long video about how that finale sucks and it's one of the worst episodes ever made. I think that's actually still the champion of the worst appearance of the Borg Queen ever. It beats out this episode, definitely beats out Dark Frontier, and it way beats out First Contact. But anyway, so when I did my hour-and-a-half video about how terrible that finale is, I got some comments response saying, oh, but... Because one of the arguments I made in that video was that future Janeway just gave the Borg the means to defeat Starfleet, and so most likely the Borg will defeat Starfleet because she's giving them access to this future technology that they can assimilate. And I got a couple comments saying, well, didn't Janeway wipe out the Borg? I'm like, huh? Like, how do you get that from that? I don't understand. Like, they never state that. They always state in the episode specifically, and believe me, I saw this episode way more than I would like to. But they never say anything about wiping out the Borg, and they always state outright that their intention was to destroy the hub, which shouldn't fucking exist anyway, but I won't get into that, was to destroy the hub to weaken the Borg. That's what they repeatedly say. Now, at the end, after Admiral Janeway infects the Borg Queen with this virus, I assume that just killed off that version of the Borg Queen, which, by the way, has already fucking been done several times, like in First Contact. So I assumed that that's all that was. So I went and did some investigating, and I checked out Memory Alpha, the Star Trek wiki, and under the heading of the Borg, and it does say, the Borg encountered future Janeway, which infected her with a virus, and it's quoted in game as the reference for that. And then the next sentence after that was, and this virus wiped out the Borg and completely crippled them. And then reference this episode, The Last Generation, for that. In other words, this is a retcon. They in game and anything following in game, and never stated that the Borg were wiped out by Admiral Janeway's shenanigans. Now, some people might say, well, it's hinted at in Picard Season 1 because there was this destroyed Borg cube. But even in that season, they never stated outright that the Borg were completely wiped out. And yes, and the Wikipedia article rightfully did not reference in-game as the source of, well, they wiped out the Borg. They referenced this episode. It's a retcon, and it's a dumb one. You know me. If you reference in game, that's not gonna sit right with me. Especially if you're saying that that Admiral Janeway wiped out the Borg, and they never intended that, and they purposely didn't intend that because they wanted to leave it open to use the Borg again. They wanted to leave it open for Picard and more future shit, because they didn't know at that stage there wouldn't be that many more next gen movies or whatever. They wanted to leave it open for the Borg to return. But now they're retconning it to say that they were damaged by that stupid virus. Now, it does fix the plot hole that I mentioned in my in-game video, but mind you, that's only one of like 12 plot holes in that episode. That episode's just a disaster. But it does fix that one, but it's a stupid retcon, so I don't care. It doesn't make me feel better about that they retconned this bullshit so they could do this stupid convoluted plot with the assimilation. And by the way, my stance on the whole assimilation virus being just like that dumb daydream the Doctor had in the episode Tinker Tenure Dr. Spy stands. Absolutely stands. I think it's stupid. I think it's okay. You could say it's actually necessary now because the Borg are a shell and they can't simply send a fleet to Earth, as I mentioned in last week's episode. So they did nix that by retconning in game. That doesn't make me feel better about it. It's still a stupid plot. It's still ridiculous how we're gonna put. First of all, the whole thing revolves around Jack Crusher and being, just because he's Jean-Luc's son, has this Borg DNA who's able to be this amplifier. That whole concept to me is just a big ball of nonsense. As I said, Jean-Luc was assimilated for 2 days, or 2 months to be fair. And the fact that they keep referencing and kept saying they did all these things, he was a counterpart to the Borg Queen. Now he had this DNA that could make and next time he has his son, is going to make him have this big amplifier and is able to control all people everywhere and send out and use his DNA to assimilate everyone. That's a whole big ball of bullshit. And just stop doing the fucking Borg. For fuck's sake, stop doing the Borg Queen. Stop referencing Best of Both Worlds. It's pissing me off. So, no, my feelings on how convoluted and nonsensical and dumb this whole thing is absolutely stand 1000%. So And when I was watching, I actually preferred the scenes when we cut back to the Titan. It's funny, I didn't realize this until halfway through the episode, but when, there was almost like a sigh of relief when we cut back from the ball of nonsense with the Enterprise D plot and the Borg Q to the Titan. Even though the Titan still deals with the ball of nonsense, for some reason I was just liked it better. But the whole thing, the one thing I was thinking, especially during the scenes that dealt with the Titan storyline, because it dealt with the fleet attacking Earth, being assimilated by the Borg and being taken over and trying to destroy all of Starfleet. I was like, this seems really, really familiar. And that's because we saw something almost exactly the same done in the Prodigy finale. And you know what? As I mentioned at the top of my video, I liked it better in Prodigy. Of course, one of the main chief reasons why I liked it better in Prodigy was because it didn't involve the fucking Borg! At least it was something original. Because I kept thinking, I was like, oh, why don't they bring in a bunch of Klingon ships or non-Starfleet ships to try to attack this fleet? And I was like, oh yeah, because then they already did that in the Prodigy finale. And yeah, so the whole time I was watching this, I was just thinking, this is just like Prodigy, but not as good. Prodigy did it better. I really, really strongly feel that way. Not that I completely hated it. And also, the Enterprise D, my nostalgia, I did have a tinge of nostalgia last week, but my nostalgia for it completely wore off. And I just, you know what, watching this, all of the member berries and fan service just makes me think about, when, the 90s Trek shows were being made, Next Generation, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, and Enterprise, particularly Voyager and Enterprise, there was this policy I heard about where they wouldn't hire any huge Star Trek fans, or at least tried to shy away from that. Of course, Enterprise Season 4, they gave up on that when Manny Koto took over. And of course, Ronald D. Moore was said to be a huge Star Trek fan when he joined Next Generation writing staff in Season 3. But for the majority, if they found out you were a huge Star Trek fan, you were less likely to get the job than more likely. And I always thought that was a dumb policy. And I was like, well, because Star Trek fans probably understand Star Trek better. You get people like Rick Berman and Brennan Breger who have no idea what Star Trek is like, and they do shit like the first 2 seasons of Enterprise. So it would be better to have Star Trek fans. But after watching this season and this episode, I now understand that policy. I now understand the dangers of indulging too much in nonsensical fan service rather than having a good plot, rather than having strong character story, which there is strong character stories in the season, which is why I don't totally hate the season, which is why, again, it's a mixed bag and not a complete shit show the way Season 2 was. But it should be more about the character stories and less about the fan service. And the whole thing, we have to have the Borg Queen, we have to have the Enterprise D, it's just, and the whole plot was just a BS excuse so they could have the Enterprise D. It was too much fan service. This whole season as a whole was overboard. Especially having Chekhov's voice at the start of the episode. I think they were implying that was Pavel's son. And I was like, how the fuck would Pavel still be alive? But then they said, I think they were implying it's his son because he mentioned, oh, my father. And I was like, oh, maybe they're saying it's his son. They just get Walter Koenig to voice him. I mean, it doesn't suck in and of itself. It's just combined. It's just too much. It's comparing it to eating a really, really dark chocolate. I like chocolate. I like dark chocolate. But it's super rich and super dark. It's just too much and it doesn't taste as good. When you have too much of a good thing, it's kind of a bad thing. And too much fan service in this season. Abso-fucking-lutely. 1,000%. And so I do like the character moments in this episode, but let me talk about the Riker and Troy. As much as I did like the character moments, and I did, again, this is another case where I kept thinking about comparing it to something that was been done before. And in this case, I was actually comparing it to season 1 of Picard in the episode Nepenthe. And again, my reaction was that episode did it better. It did, because it showed the daughter, it showed them as a happy family, but here they have to have, high stakes where Riker's super depressed and Troy's upset with him, and then they have to get back together and they have to do it in the middle of this apocalypse where they're fighting the Borg that are trying to destroy the whole galaxy. Which, as I mentioned before, like, Star Trek desperately needs to get away from that. They need to get away. Everything must be high stakes. And I actually prefer the softer, less high stakes, more low stakes, more personal, more character interaction of Nepenthe. I think that actually did it better. Now, something I'll talk about in my overall review of season 3 of Picard is I did like season 3 of Picard better than season 1, slightly, because season 1 was they're both mixed bags, but season 1 had just as low lows as season 3 did, but season 3 had higher highs. So therefore, I like season 3 a little bit better. But in this instant, season 1 was better, because I still think that's one of my favorite episodes of modern Trek, is that episode in Nepenthe, and I still think it beats out anything, particularly with the Riker Troy stuff that they did in this season. So that's another comparison I was making in my head. But the Jack Crusher and Picard stuff, look, so the scenes where Picard assimilated himself and went into Jack's head while he was being assimilated and talked him down to it, that felt really cliche. I feel like I've seen this. I was like, oh yeah, it's a bit silly. It's I've seen it so many times before, even in Star Trek itself, where they're oh, listen, a loved one being listen to my voice, I'll bring you out of it. It's felt. And sometimes, when some movies or shows, even ones, that I haven't seen yet, let's say hypothetical ones in the future, they could do this where it does pull at the heartstrings, because even though I've seen this trope so many times before, if they do it in a way that's really effective and really well earned, then it will affect me, where I did not feel like this one was very, because the whole Borg Queen plot and the whole Borg plot was not at all well earned. And this is a huge factor of it. So I just felt yeah, this is the nonsense that I've seen before. Picard's just going to go in and give Jack a pep talk and tell him how much he loves him. That's going to pull him out of it. And he's going to go out and run and defeat the Borg. And that's exactly what happened. But to be fair, I did like the Picard and Jack making up, and how how they didn't end with either of them dying, which it's different than I thought. And I did like the Picard saying, I should have been with you the whole time and whatnot, and saying that he coming to the revelation. It was a good character moment for Picard to realize that he all of his life he wanted Starfleet to be his family, and it was harkened back to that scene in the earlier part of the season where they showed the flashback of Jack trying to seek out Picard and being Starfleet's the only family I ever needed, and him realizing that's not true. So that was a good moment, and I did like it. It was just surrounded by this plot of nonsense. So, yeah, I can only like it so much. Also, there's this whole thing throughout the episode where they were kept implying that Picard and Riker and all them were going to die, particularly Picard, Riker, and Worf. They were saying goodbyes. Like when Picard went to the Borg ship, they was like saying farewell, and everyone was saying their goodbye. And I thought to myself, like, there's no reason these characters would be behaving that way if they weren't setting up for Picard to die. So Picard's definitely gonna die at the end of this episode, and especially knowing that this was the series finale. And I'm like, oh yeah, they're totally killing off Picard. And apparently Terry Matalas even said in an interview that none of the legacy characters are safe. Yet they actually didn't kill any of them off. So they even said the Tuvok was still alive. So I don't know what the fuck he was talking about. They were all safe. But anyway. I mean, Spot, I suppose. I don't know what he's talking about. But yeah, so they were like, and then when Riker was on the ship, he was like saying his farewells to Troy, like, I'll see you with my son, and then so I was like, oh, they're totally setting up for them to die, and then they lived. And so yeah, it subverted my expectations, but I was like, made me also think, like, so why'd they do that? Why were they being so dramatic and saying their goodbyes? It's not like they've never been in situations where they've gone and taken a risk where they most likely would die. They've been in situations like that dozens of times before. So it seems like a contrived fake out to get the audience to think that they were going to die, which of course it worked. But then when I look back on it, I'm like, that was pointless. That was really pointless. If the point was just to describe how high the stakes were, I'm like, they've been in high stakes tons of times. I really didn't see what made this thing any different. Now, getting back more to the positives, I did think, as I said, I liked the Titan storyline. I liked 7 of 9's, taking over, and I thought the chef was a really nice touch as well, because usually the Starfleet officers are larger than life, but here it shows like that even the little guy who had no military training whatsoever was being called upon to save humanity. It was a nice little touch. I did like that, and I liked Seven's stand with Raffi, and it was such a huge... I was invested. I was relieved physically when, the Borg were destroyed, and all the younger people went back to being themselves, and like, oh my god, I can't believe what I'm doing, and Starfleet was saved. Like, that was a relief. I did enjoy that. Now, it's funny because I just watched Lord of the Rings Return of the King, and one of my... comments on that is I'm so sick of people saying that it has too many endings or multiple endings, because I completely and utterly disagree. I think we need all those endings. Except for the one with Sam and his family. That's the one thing I think they could have left for the extended version, not necessarily kept in theatrical. But other than that, like, all those endings we absolutely 1000% needed, and I fight anyone on that says Return of the King has too many endings. They do not understand the trilogy. You do not understand Lord of the Rings if you think that. And the reason why I bring this up now is because this episode actually is an example of too many endings. It's like, okay. It's like the epilogue was going on and 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 on. Now, is it cool that they ended like the whole series? And I seem to doubt that this is the last time we'll see these legacy characters. It might be the last time we see all 7 of them together, but because they just love draining that cash cow. But anyway, is it fitting that the last time we see these all 7 legacy characters together are them playing poker? Sure. It was a nice little touch. Maybe if they didn't have like 6,000 endings, I wouldn't have been tired of it by the time they got to it. But it's fine. It was fitting. It was fine. Like, I didn't think it was the best thing ever, and like, oh my god, this is so great, and it didn't like make me have nerdgasms or anything like that. But I didn't hate it. It was fine. But the other stuff with like Q and Jack, honestly, I think I would have liked it better if it was Wesley. I think Wesley was the one element that was missing from that season, and they should, that stupid bullshit they pulled at the end of Picard season 2 with Wesley, like, that was dumb ass, and I feel like they should have brought him back in order to rectify that. And it would have been cool for Wesley to see his brother. And to him be like, have the magical powers and show up and be like, and it would have felt like there was more connection there than Q, who just because he's Picard's son, I don't know, and that Q thing just felt wrong to me. It felt, again, more needless fan service. Whereas if it was Wesley, that would have felt more appropriate for the plot to me. And then, of course, Guinan wouldn't even show up at her own bar. Don't even get me started about the 10-4 bullshit. Like, I wish they weren't there. And the jokes with Worf, again, in this episode, I didn't think they worked. Like when he fell asleep on the bridge. I don't know. It went too far with him. They were making too much of a dumb comic relief character in this episode. A lot of the jokes with him earlier in the season I thought did work a lot, not all. But this one, yeah, did not. I did enjoy the moment with him and Raffi, though. I thought that was well earned. Even though, Raffi's storyline was really tied up in a huge, nice bow, but really that's one of my least complaints of this episode. So yeah. Oh, and yeah, Dr. Crusher just so happens to find the cure for changelings, so that's nicked in the bud immediately, and yeah. So anyway, 7 of 9 being the captain and is cool. And them renaming the ship the Enterprise G. More fan service, but whatever. And Raffi being her first officer. I mean, if we get a Star Trek Legacy show, I don't really want Raffi there. I'm sorry. But whatever. Fine. So one thing I did forget to mention was the scene at the end where they're trying to say what 7 of 9 catchphrase is going to be to, say engage. And I think they even listed off a bunch of other catchphrases that people do, and they're making such a big deal out of it. And Jack is like, huh, what's it going to be? And then they cut right before 7 of 9 is supposed to speak. I hated that. I'm sick of them making such a big deal out of what the catchphrase is. And in fact, the Strange New Worlds trailer, season 2 trailer, was just dropped yesterday, and they did the same joke. They played on the same thing where Spock is like, "Go fast now" or something like that, and then they do this right after it. And even if it wasn't for that, I'm kind of sick of it. I think I like Lower Decks when they make fun of it, when they do the warp me thing or whatever, because it's a parody, it's a comedy show, it's supposed to be silly, and they do it way better, and so that's fine, but I think here it's just dumb, and I just really didn't like it. Yeah, Jack Crusher being the consultant, just making him a fucking ensign, and it's bad enough that they, I'll buy them fast tracking him to ensign, bypassing the whole time. I kept thinking, isn't Starfleet Academy a really huge necessary step in becoming a Starfleet officer? Well, apparently 7 of 9 probably skipped it too, so whatever. Kirk went from a cadet to a captain, so I guess it just reminds me of that same style, but whatever. But him actually being a consultant and not just being a background ensign flung somewhere and sitting in the command station, Well, fine, I guess. I don't care anymore. So, jeez. I was going to give this a 6, but I have talking about it now thinks I was being way too generous. So, my rating for The Last Generation out of 10 is a 5. And even that, again, I think I'm being generous. A 5 average. Because I gotta admit, there are things about this episode I did like. I did like the stand of a 7 of 9. I did like the some of the character interactions were well earned. As I said, the Picard and Jack moment, even though they had that cliche bullshit about "come back to me, Jack," it was still, the way they did it was still nice. And even though the Troy and Riker stuff was not as good as the Pente, it was still nice. And even though that the plot with the Starfleet attacking Earth was not as good as Prodigy finale, it was still nice. Yeah, and then playing poker at the end, yeah, that was nice. So, a 5. It's fine, I guess. It's just too much. Like, don't even get me started on the Borg Queen again. Just don't. And there's just too much. It's too flagrant fan service. You know what? Part of me was with everyone else wanting to see Star Trek Legacy and see a continuation with 7 of 9 and Jack Crusher. But another part of me is like, well, that means Terry Matalas would be the showrunner. And so then the season will probably be nothing but fan service and just have nonsensical plots. So I'm not sure if I'm on board. If this is any indication of what Legacy would be like, I'm not sure I want it. But, I could hope that they would actually do something good with it and get away from the fan. Maybe he's just doing fan service because it's got the original TNG cast, but I doubt that. And maybe they wouldn't fall back. And by the way, I would say the only thing I liked about the Borg is that in this episode was that they pretty much stated that this is the end of the Borg. But I can't trust that. I really can't trust that. I can't trust this is the last time we won't see Picard or Riker or any of these characters. Like, I won't believe it. Because they just love that fan service too much. They just feed on it. They just love that fucking fan service. And I don't trust them, especially Terry Matalas, to not fall back on the same bullshit over and over and over and over again. And like, even fucking Prodigy had a Borg episode, which was fine because it didn't have the Borg Queen. Oh God, yes, I'm serious. Borg Queen is now my least favorite character, worst character in all of Star Trek. But anyway, that is it for my review of Star Trek Picard Season 3, Episode 10. As I mentioned before, I shall be back next week to do my review for Season 3 of Picard as a whole. In the meantime, you can check out a live discussion. I will be doing this Monday night at 9 p.m. East Coast time with my sister Alyssa from Alyssa Jean Reviews. Someone who's been way more positive on the show, which I'm sure we're going to disagree with a lot of specific details, but I'm sure it'll be interesting to get more perspectives on, and perhaps might be joined by someone else as well, who's also more positive. So I'm going to be outnumbered, but that's okay. It'll be interesting to have a discussion with a lot of different viewpoints and different opinions. And also talking about, like, it seems like I can barely find any other reviewers who are as negative as I am, although if you're familiar with Steve Shives, he's definitely more negative than me. So that's at least refreshing for me to know that there's someone out there who's even more negative than I am. But anyway, that's it for my review of the finale of Picard Season 3. Be sure to check out my channel as I cover many more Star Trek videos, currently covering every episode of Star Trek the original series and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.